ladies and gentlemen. This is Lucas with Habits of Holiness, and today I want to talk to you about my 3 favorite books on marriage. If you don't know, I got married on June 30th of this year, so I've been married for 7 weeks now. By no means am I an expert on marriage. I don't really know much at all, but I've read these 3 books. And I want to tell you, I've read some others too. These are my 3 favorites. They're all really different. And the first one I want to talk about is Preparing for Marriage by Dennis Rainey. And this book it's what you think about when you think about a marriage book. It's super practical, and there's chapters on how to deal with money, how to deal with sexuality, how to deal with in-laws, how to even make the decision to get married, how to communicate roles and responsibilities. And it's a really helpful resource because if you haven't thought about those things with your fiance, with your boyfriend, girlfriend, it's a really good thing to think about because once you get into marriage, if you have different ideas about those things, it can be problematic really fast. And that's something that my wife Natalie and I have talked about in our 7 weeks of marriage as we've come across different expectations for what I'm supposed to do as a husband, what she's supposed to do as a wife, kind of what our roles are or how we're supposed to communicate. I tend to not communicate as much where she really wants to talk through things. And this book was really helpful in our engagement, and we've continued to look through it in our marriage, and I'm sure we'll continue to do so for years to come because it's a good reminder for all those practical things that helps make marriage work. The second book that I want to talk about is You and Me Forever by Francis and Lisa Chan. And this book we read throughout our engagement, and it's honestly one of my favorite books I've ever read. And if I had to describe it in a certain way, I would say it's like the anti-marriage book. And the reason why is because it's not practical. It is not like Preparing for Marriage. It does not talk about what you're supposed to do. This talks about marriage, the subtitle, Marriage in Light of Eternity. This talks about the relationship that Jesus has with the church. It talks about marriage in a more meta way, in a more theological way. But it's really, really important because it talks about marriage in light of eternity, and one of their points that they make, which is somewhat disconcerting, is that you're not married for eternity. There's really no evidence in Scripture that when you get to heaven, the husband and wife are still married. And the reason why is because if you're a Christian, you are married to Jesus. The church is the bride of Christ. And this book, Francis and Lisa Chan, they talk all about how there's a more important picture going on. There's a more important marriage going on between you and Jesus. And so in You and Me Forever, they talk about you and Jesus forever, and how even more important than the really practical things of how to deal with money, how to love each other well, how to communicate well, is how to push each other to grow spiritually, how to push each other to Jesus. That's been the biggest thing for Natalie and I, is how do we push each other to love Jesus more than we love each other. Every day in my marriage to Natalie, I want her to grow to love Jesus more than she loves me. And this book was really the catalyst for me thinking about that. Was, of course I want Natalie to love me. Everyone wants their spouse to love them. But more importantly, I'm not going to be married to her forever. For eternity, she will be married to Jesus. So how do I get her to focus on that relationship? And if you're engaged, if you're thinking about getting married, or if you're married as a Christian, I can't recommend this book enough because it's more important than the really practical things about marriage. It's about Jesus. And so take this book, read it, and I really hope you enjoy it. And the third book is totally different from the other ones, and it's Intended for Pleasure by Ed and Gay Wheat. I don't know where the dust jacket is for this book, but this book, it's all about sexuality, and sexuality in light of Christ, in light of the Bible. And it's a biblical theology of sexuality. And this is something that really everything in this book, I'm almost done with it. It's been groundbreaking for me because if you're like me, you grew up and not really talking a ton about sexuality with your family. You learn a lot about sexuality from friends, from school, from pornography, and this book really, it cuts through all of that and talks about how does Jesus view sexuality, how does God view sexuality, and how do you love and serve your spouse sexually. And if you're married, it's so important. And so I would recommend this book because While the other practical things like money and stuff that Preparing for Marriage talks about, there's a little bit about sexuality in that book, but this book really unpacks it. It's super, super practical, but it also talks about the theology of sexuality. How should you approach your spouse in a sexual relationship? And it's something that's so important and it's so lost in our culture. So I want to put this out there. I'll leave a link to all three of these books in the description, and please take a look at them, rent them from your library, buy them online. If you know me, ask me for my copy and I'll let you borrow it. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoy these books. If you've read any of them, leave a note in the comments about what you thought about them. I would love to talk to you. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.